some things for you to think about, both for this section and for the rest of the course, are things like, why does disease spread? So maybe as part of your assignment where you make comments, you can try to answer some of these questions. Why do we see diseases spread? What enhances or makes it more rapid or easier for diseases to spread? Why do we typically see disease spread more in cities than in rural areas? And are these things true today? Were they true in ancient times? Are they true now? So these are some ideas for things that you can try to answer and interact with your peers on this video. In the ancient world, again, lots of plagues. People didn't know what type of organism was causing these plagues. We know now. So things like smallpox were found in the Roman Empire and pretty much everywhere else. And smallpox is a virus. Shigella, much like salmonella, is a bacterial infection that causes gastrointestinal disease. Malaria is transmitted by mosquitoes, but it's caused by a protozoan, which is a single-cell parasite. Measles is a virus. Cholera, we'll talk more about some of these in later sections. Cholera is also a bacterial infection that is transmitted by specifically contaminated water and does cause gastrointestinal complications. Dengue is thought of as a tropical or subtropical viral infection transmitted by mosquitoes, but we do sometimes see dengue in the US in states like Texas and Florida. And the plague, the Justinian plague, which led to the Middle Ages, also a bacterial infection. So plague, Yersinia pestis, the Black Death, bacterial. Lots of different kinds of organisms that cause plagues. We alluded to this a little bit in the first part of this section, but again, a question for you to think about, and of course I've posed some answers here. They may not be all of the answers, but maybe there's some of them. Why is it hard to know what the cause of an ancient disease, especially an ancient plague, was? Ancient people didn't record information about the disease, especially when we're talking about prehistoric populations before they had writing. Ancient people could not identify the disease the same way we do. We have microscopes and genetic testing, and we can look at a person's immune response. All that they had in those days was looking at the symptoms. They didn't know what was causing it. You can't really isolate organisms, not even just bacteria. It's hard to isolate whole organisms from people who've been dead for thousands of years. With the schistosomes, we used the mummies that had preserved protein in the skin, but for the most part, the remains of ancient people are bone, if that. There is no tissue left over. There's really nothing left to analyze. All of the above, more answers that I haven't thought of yet? Definitely. So if you think of something that might be another reason that's hard for us to identify what the cause of an ancient disease is, you could leave that as a comment. During the Middle Ages, what was it like? What was the climate like? So this was, no ice age, no extreme heat waves. What diseases were there? What were the cities like? What was the population like? So generally when we're talking about the Middle Ages, what we're talking about is from the fall of the Roman Empire to the fall of Constantinople, which is now Istanbul. So it's a span of about 2,000 years, but there was a lot that was happening during those times, and people got better about documenting things like disease. Really commonly, you had typhoid, smallpox, the flu, other gastrointestinal infections, venereal diseases, things like that. Cities got bigger and bigger, places like London, Paris, all of these, major European metropolitan areas were getting bigger and bigger and more crowded. And so the population, again, was moving into these cities. These cities were becoming really densely packed with people, thus promoting more disease spread. So in the Middle Ages, as more and more people started living in close proximity, we saw increasing cases, I guess, of different diseases. So leprosy is ancient. Let's get that out of the way. Leprosy is talked about in the Bible and other religious texts, but it got even more prevalent when people started living in close proximity to one another, because it is often transmitted by direct contact. Tuberculosis also got more common because it has to be transmitted by inhaling the bacteria that's being coughed out by someone else. And then there was another disease that they called sweating sickness. And with sweating sickness, what they tended to have, it was sweating, high fever, a lot of sweating associated with that fever, and a relatively high mortality rate. And to this day, there is no real definition or definitive cause of sweating sickness. Some people think that it may have been a type of enterovirus, so a gastrointestinal virus, maybe a bacterial infection called relapsing fever. But some scientists, there's a lot of evidence that suggests perhaps it was an unknown type of hantavirus. So we have hantavirus in the US, and there's hantavirus in East Asia. So maybe it was an unknown hantavirus that was around during the end of the Middle Ages. But again, because we have that inability to go back and test the tissues for the presence of an organism, we can't definitively say what was causing that disease. There are lots of diseases that cause high fever and sweating. So with leprosy, this was even described as far back as in ancient Egypt. I told you in the Bible. If you examine a large tumor of Kansu, that was what they called it, in any part of a man, and it is terrible and it has made many swellings, something has appeared in it like that in which there is air, then you shall say concerning it, it is a swelling of Kansu. You should not do anything against it. What can happen, there's a couple different forms of leprosy, but often it leads to nerve damage and death of the extremities, and so people will lose their nose, their fingers, etc. But it's really not all that contagious. You really have to come into contact with somebody who's got the infection. So that's why in cities in the Middle Ages, when they were really densely packed, it was more likely to see the spread of the disease. It scared people because, again, you can see the deformities that the infection would cause, and those are permanent. So what would happen is that when somebody started experiencing symptoms, they were actually shipped off to what's called a leper colony. And they were isolated there for the rest of their lives to help hopefully prevent the spread of the disease in the rest of the population. And we had at least one leper colony that I know of in the US as well. Even with antibiotic therapy, leprosy is a tricky infection to treat because the bacterium grows so slowly. Most of our antibiotics work against bacteria that are actively growing. And the faster they're growing, the faster we can kill them. The slower they're growing, the longer you have to take the antibiotics in order to kill the infection. The bacteria that causes leprosy is really closely related to the bacteria that causes tuberculosis. They're in the same genus. So they're about as closely related as a horse and a donkey. Super, super closely related. It takes between minimum 6 to 9 months of everyday antibiotics to treat tuberculosis. It's very hard to get patients to comply. So with leprosy, it's the same challenge. Extended antibiotic treatment, very hard to get patients to comply with taking the antibiotics as prescribed. In the US, we have an animal reservoir, an animal that holds the infection, armadillos. So I never recommend touching an armadillo. People do touch armadillos. Again, I don't recommend it. They are very cute. I know they don't look cute, but they're very cute. They have a tendency to get hit by cars because what they do is as they're crossing the road, if they see the car, they get scared by the headlights or something, they jump straight up in the air. And so they get nailed by the car. And when I lived in Texas, you mostly see armadillos dead on the side of the road. And I don't know why I would have to tell somebody this, but, don't play with roadkill. Leave that to, animal control, the professional people who are supposed to deal with roadkill. But one day we were going hiking and we saw an armadillo dead on the side of the road. Again, not like that, not that rare, relatively common. And when we came back, somebody had put a can of beer in its hands. And of course it was Lone Star beer, which they call it the national beer of Texas. And I'm like, who in the world gets out of their car, touches a roadkill armadillo, and then puts a beer can in its hands? Well, somebody who wants leprosy, apparently. Other ancient plagues, malaria. In areas that have standing water, you're going to have mosquitoes. And mosquitoes can transmit malaria. We had a lot of malaria in the US, but our vector control, so a vector is something that can transmit disease, usually something like a mosquito or a tick. Our vector control districts were able to help us get rid of standing water, kind of get rid of swampy areas where these mosquitoes would breed. And we did not have malaria in the US for a very long time until earlier this year. And now local cases of malaria have been found in Florida and Maryland. And I think one in Texas. I'm not 100% sure about the one in Texas, but definitely in Florida and Maryland. So, these diseases are still around. At least malaria is still around, and it is found in the US again. Smallpox is a disease that we do not have anymore. It has been completely eradicated from the planet. It was the first disease to ever be eradicated from the planet through a very strong vaccination strategy in the 60s and 70s. But it has a relatively high mortality rate. Something like 30% of people who got smallpox would die. So it was really important to be able to get rid of that. And then bubonic plague, the Black Death, which is caused by a bacterium called Yersinia pestis. We don't tend to see plagues of it in the US, but we do have plague in the US. We have the bacterium that causes plague in the US. And we have it even in California. Every couple of years, there will be somebody who gets plague. That's what they call the infection, the Black Death, from camping up near Yosemite. Without antibiotics, it's interesting to think about how ancient people treated disease. Now, if you have an infection, you go to the doctor, you get some antibiotics, you're good to go. You go to the hospital, you get some fluid replacement, you're good to go. So what did they do when that wasn't an option? Well, one thought was that you could bathe in blood. These diseases were thought to reside in the blood, and if your blood was bad, they might be in there. If you use good blood, perhaps you can help clear out the infection. So the blood of children and virgins was best. They were uncorrupted. And this was even used as a therapy for leprosy until 1790, which I know is a long time ago, but it's not that long ago to think about like bathing in somebody else's blood. Speaking of blood, you could bathe in it, or you could have some of yours removed if your blood is bad or your blood is unbalanced. The fluids in the body, they called them humors. And so if your humors, like your blood and your bile, were unbalanced, you could have some of your blood removed in order to get rid of the badness. They didn't know it was infection, they just thought it was bad blood. So this could be accomplished in a few different ways. Leeches were one way. So leeches are a type of animal that will suck the blood of another organism. But I know if you think of the term barber, you think of a barber as somebody who cuts your hair, especially does men's haircuts or short haircuts, not just men's haircuts, but short haircuts. And you might picture the blue, white, and red kind of striped pole that they have outside of a barber shop. The barbers used to be the bloodletters. So the red represents the blood that they would remove from the body. And George Washington was treated this way before his death. And probably he had a little bit too much blood removed, and it might have accelerated his death. People also knew that toxic metals like mercury or arsenic could be used to treat infection. To this day, sure, they can still treat infection because they kill microorganisms. They kill you too. They are toxic. So things like mercury and arsenic were used to treat things like syphilis, even until the early 20th century, basically until the development of antibiotics. But they also, mercury made people crazy. Arsenic killed them. If you've watched Alice in Wonderland or read the book The Mad Hatter, people who made hatters used a lot of mercury. So the saying was mad as a hatter because the mercury messes with your brain. Animal dung was also used as a type of treatment. The Egyptians used it for many diseases and infections. It does have some antimicrobial properties, mostly because antibiotics are compounds that are made by microorganisms and they can use them to fight one another. So sure, the animal dung could have some antimicrobial properties. It could also have microbes, like the one that causes tetanus. So one of the things that they used to do for neonates, like newborns, they would seal off the umbilical stump using animal dung. And a lot of times the baby would die of tetanus. So I hope I don't have to make this explicit for y'all, but I'm going to anyway because that's my professional duty. Please do not put poop on an umbilical stump. Keep it sterile. Moldy bread was also used by especially the Egyptians to disinfect cuts. And why would this be a good idea? Well, I told you that a lot of microorganisms are the ones that actually produce antibiotics. For example, penicillin, the antibiotic penicillin, is produced by a fungus called penicillium. They didn't know this, but they just knew that if the bread was moldy, it could make the cut heal faster. And that's why. The final idea I guess we can talk about is called therapeutic stink. So basically the idea was, especially during the Black Death, the Black Plague, they thought that it was caused by bad air. So if something smelled bad, right, it could transmit disease. For even malaria, right? Malaria, bad air. But we know that that's not how a lot of diseases are transmitted. It's not just because the air is bad, it's because it's infected with a bacterium or something. So they thought that it was the bad air that was transmitting plague. It was fleas, not, by the way, not bad air. So if you got something else that was stinky, which literally sometimes was farts in a jar, you could use the like to balance out the like. So the stinky to fight the stinky, and hopefully basically disinfect the air. That one didn't work. You know, I wanted to end on farts in a jar, but maybe next time I'll rearrange the slides to make farts in a jar the last thing, because I feel like it's just such a good stopping point. But mice were also used as ancient treatments, and this is kind of gross. The Egyptians would make a mouse paste for toothaches. I didn't read the details of exactly how they did it. Like, were there particular parts of the mice that they used to make a paste? Mice are so small, I'm just picturing they mashed up a whole mouse and used it as a mouth paste. In Elizabethan England, if you cut a mouse in half, you could put that on your wart to help treat your wart. Again, I don't actually know how well that would have worked. You could also use mice and mice parts to treat things like whooping cough, smallpox, measles, and bedwetting. Again, the efficacy of that is probably just nothing. Venom, snake, bee, etc., could also be used to treat leprosy. And this one is a weird one where it sounds like, yeah, that doesn't sound right, but it actually can work for some conditions. For example, bee venom can be used to help reduce some of the symptoms of something like multiple sclerosis. So there are some benefits, but again, as you might imagine, there are also some really big downsides to using venom to try to treat an infection.